The story of Bethlehem. Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome indeed to Mercy Aiken and Cole Martin. I'll leave Mercy and Cole to tell you more about their stories, but just to say how exciting it is to gather with people from so many different places. Mercy, hi from the US, from Arizona, and Cole from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and to you all, wherever you are. And first, the equivalent of an acknowledgement of country, which we in Australia and in other places feel is important. We acknowledge the first peoples of lands around the globe and the havoc and violence accompanying colonisation and colonialism. We look to a better future and commit to working towards it. Before I hand over to Mercy and Cole, just a few words about PIEN, the Palestine Israel Ecumenical Network. Most of you will already know about us, thus your attendance here, but just in brief, as you might know, we're a network of Australian Christians and supporters who commit to seeking justice and a lasting peace for all the people of the Holy Land. And we proclaim this message to churches, to politicians, and more widely, wherever and to whomever we can. So in the current context, we continue our advocacy for the people of Gaza and the West Bank. We name the genocide in Gaza. We lament the terrible Israeli settler violence in the West Bank. And what is also at stake, of course, are the long-time issues of occupation and its accompanying violence. So the story of Bethlehem is ongoing. We thank also today APAN, the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network, for the webinar platform. They're not co-hosts, but they've facilitated in this way. So to Mercy and Cole, I'll leave Cole to tell us about an equivalent organisation to PIEN in New Zealand, Aotearoa Christians for Peace. Now, I believe Mercy is going to start. So welcome indeed to both of you, and we now enter into your story and what you will bring us.
Thank you so much, Helen. Really nice to see you again. Really nice to see you too, Cole, and everybody. Thank you so much for coming. So my name is Mercy Aiken. I'll just briefly introduce myself. I work for an organization called Peace Catalyst International. You can find it at peacecatalyst.org if you're curious to learn more about it. We are a Christian-based organization that really believes that preaching the gospel includes the gospel of peace, and that peacemaking is a central pillar of our Christian faith. It's not an add-on. It's not an option. So at Peace Catalyst, our goal is to work towards peace and justice in our communities and to equip our fellow Christians to follow Jesus by becoming peace builders too. So that's the organization that I'm working with and representing today. But I have spent many years living in Bethlehem on and off since 2015. And so I have seen a very tragic decline in the quality of life in Bethlehem, in the freedom of movement in Bethlehem, in every factor that you would use to measure life that is flourishing or life that is living under oppression. Bethlehem has continued to just fall deeper and deeper into a really, really terrible situation as it is today. So I kind of bring a perspective of having come and gone now over at least a decade and seeing the Bethlehem that I remember 10 years ago versus the Bethlehem that I saw during COVID versus the Bethlehem that I have seen since I've come back to the Holy Land 3 times since October 7th of 2023, most lately this last summer. So I just want to orient us just a little bit to Bethlehem. I don't know how many people here have ever been to Bethlehem or what kind of ideas you might have in your mind when you think about Bethlehem. And so I just want to share a few slides and kind of help us step into Bethlehem. So I am going to try to share my screen right now. And is it sharing? Do people see
Yeah,
it?
we've got it sharing there.
Screen sharing, but I need to make it bigger, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, let me
It's the
see.
play from start button at the top there should do it.
Yeah, play from start.
Hey, beautiful.
Is that it?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for your patience. I am not the most technologically advanced person on planet Earth. I'm going to share first just a few Advent thoughts because we are starting the first Sunday in Advent tomorrow, and we're talking about Bethlehem. And I think it's really important to center everything that we're going to be talking about today through the filter of Advent and what that means, and just the significance of Bethlehem itself as a representative of the entire West Bank. So these are some thoughts from our Peace Catalyst Advent devotional, which you can get online. It's free if you go to our website, if you want to use it in your church. And a few ideas also from Friends of Sabile and some of my thoughts. So first, I just want to start by pointing out that the rage of Herod at the very first Advent is the last gasp of the old order and the desperate attempt to hold on to the old way. That's a quote from Walter Brueggemann. The rage of Herod is the last gasp of the old order and the desperate attempt to hold on to the old way. We live globally in a time of oppression and violence, injustice and inequality, and Bethlehem, in the time of Christ and now, remains in that Advent period. Okay. But Advent reminds us that it's also a time of powerful expectation, a time when we see the signs of something new breaking through, even if we're only just glimpsing it. There is a new world that is struggling to be born within and through the final thrashings of this monstrous system that we see operating in the world today. All of these pictures, by the way, or most of them, have been taken just since the Gaza genocide began in Bethlehem. The old way, the old order of Herod functions only through violence and domination and dehumanization of those who threaten its domination or who aren't contributing to its wealth. It's a system that exploits and destroys the land and cries out, "Peace, peace," when there is no peace. So this is where we find ourselves at in Advent. It's a time of struggle and expectation, and it mirrors the experience of the early Jesus community as they faced the overwhelming power of the Roman Empire. The Advent story was intended to affirm a new way expressed in the lives of the poor and dispossessed. Advent tells a story that seeks peace through justice and that yearns for a world of abundance where everyone can live and flourish in right relationship together. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them the light has shined. That's Isaiah 6:2. When the early church spoke of Advent, it was never abstract, and I could say that's also the case for the church in Palestine and the church in Gaza, as pictured here. When they spoke of Advent, when they speak of Advent, it is an act of protest and faith. They proclaim that Jesus is Lord in a world that already has its Lord, Caesar. They believe that God's kingdom is breaking into history, unmasking the Pax Romana, or maybe we could say today the Pax Americana, the false peace and delegitimizing way of every empire that's built on domination and fear and violence. This was not a comfortable theology then or now. It is a dangerous allegiance. To confess Christ's coming means that we live differently. It means that we embody another way of being human. It means loving our enemies and breaking down walls of division. and structural injustice rather than walls of homes and buildings that people use. But as the church became entangled with power, first tolerated and then favored and then enthroned, the apocalyptic edge of what Advent is all about began to dull, and it has become very dull in our world today. It is time for a rebirth. Reflecting on the situation in Bethlehem especially is a perfect way to do this. Here at the beginning of Advent, perhaps the scenes that come to mind are cozy little thoughts of Christmas, twinkling lights shining through the winter darkness, love of family and friends, a thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices, because in Bethlehem breaks a new and glorious morn. But this, my friends, what we're seeing in this photo here, these two photos, this is the reality in Bethlehem today. As I wrote shortly after arriving in Bethlehem in 2015 for the first time. By the way, this is one photo. It looks almost like two, but this is looking into the walled-off hotel and coffee shop, which is facing the separation wall in Bethlehem. And as you can see, it's dressed up for Christmas time. And this was a Christmas right before COVID in 2019. But as I wrote shortly after arriving in Bethlehem in 2015, Bethlehem is a graffiti-covered separation wall that surrounds the city on three sides. It is crowded refugee camps where children play with marbles and narrow streets. It's the sweet smoke of shisha and incense, of beeswax candles and Arabic coffee mingled with tear gas, skunk water, or the smoke of burning tires. Bethlehem is populated with animated shopkeepers, tired old women, scholars, stone throwers, saints, and stylish young mothers. Those who live in Bethlehem will invite you off of the street into their tiny home. Perhaps they will serve you a feast on a small coffee table. To live in Bethlehem is to engage in frequent conversation about what it means to love your neighbors and your enemies. But most of all, Bethlehem is filled with people who want to live in dignity, as their great-grandfathers did under the shade of their own olive and lemon trees. I wanted to lay this foundation so that you can begin to feel a little bit of the city, just to sense it, to smell it, to understand the people who live there, the diversity, the humanity of Bethlehem, and to love it as it is now, not as it exists in our Christmas card imaginations, not with sentimentality, not as a Hallmark movie, but as it is. And also to think about the challenges that Bethlehem brings to us during this Advent. A few things you should know. Whoops. I want to go back to that. A few things you should know about Bethlehem. It has one of the highest rates of unemployment of any Palestinian city, mainly due to the severing of its economy from Jerusalem, which was its sister city for millennia and being cut off from most of the tourism that comes to the land. So this is, again, the separation wall. This is taken from Ida refugee camp. And if you see the olive groves behind the wall, that's all land that belongs to Bethlehem. All those olive trees belonged to people who lived in Bethlehem. So that was a big part of the economy that was cut off from the city when the wall went up. Bethlehem is one of the most crowded places on earth. It's almost as crowded as Gaza was. This is due to the loss of almost all of its green spaces, as you saw in the last slide. All around the city, all the green spaces have been taken, almost all of them, confiscated by Israelis for settlements, settlement roads, settlement military bases, the separation wall, and other uses for the Israeli state. So the city has nowhere to grow. It's just becoming more and more densely crowded. Bethlehem is also one of the few places in the West Bank where Christianity remains the highest. Like, you're going to find more Christians in Bethlehem than most other places in the West Bank. But even in Bethlehem, Christians are no longer a majority within the Bethlehem municipality. So I was in Bethlehem when COVID hit, and I spent the first few months of the pandemic there. During that time, I saw the decline, the poverty, hitting levels of desperation that I'd never seen before. People were coming up to me begging which you don't normally see. Like old women would see me and come running after me and ask me for money. And in an honor shame culture, you don't normally see that. And I experienced that many, many times during COVID. And I didn't think it could get any worse. But when I came back to Bethlehem um, after the Gaza genocide began in October of 23, I came back in the summer of 24 and also in the summer of 25. I realized that Bethlehem could indeed actually get worse. Um, I want to just talk a little bit about a broad overview of some of the changes that have happened in Bethlehem since 2023. And then I'm going to pass it to Cole, who's going to begin to share some personal stories. And then Cole and I will begin to talk more about personal experiences we've had in the land since the war began, since the genocide began. But these stats were the most recent that I could get. I am not 100% sure that they're accurate. If anything, any of these numbers are going to be higher than what I'm giving right here. But since 2023, at least 114 new settlement outposts have been established in the West Bank, which was more than double all of the settlement outposts established since 2014. So in a 2-year period, more than double what had been going on for almost a decade. This does not include the 49 retroactively legalized settlements that had previously been illegal, and the expansion of existing settlements and other Palestinian land taken for military bases, firing zones, Israeli roads, and other development and infrastructure. In the past year, I'm just talking about 2025, at least 36,000 Palestinians have been displaced in the West Bank after Israeli forces demolished their homes and communities, including the refugee camps of Nur Shams, Jenin, and Tulkarm. Israeli forces have demolished, confiscated, or sealed at least 3,590 structures, including homes. So this is the most extreme displacement, homeless crisis in the West Bank for decades. And this is something that people have not been, this information is sort of flying under the radar, that we have tens of thousands of homeless people just since October 7th in the West Bank. There has been a massive uptick of settler violence, an average of 4 incidents of settler violence per day since October 7th, 23. In the occupied West Bank. That's the highest on record. Settlers have burned cars and farmland. We'll talk about this more specifically, destroyed water sources, and much more. This has cost Palestinians an estimated $76 million in direct agricultural damages in basically 1 year. So when we talk about the strangulation of the economy on the West Bank, this is one aspect of it. There's a lot more. Israel has detained more than 20,000 Palestinians in the West Bank since October of 23, 15,000 of them children, and at least 98 have died in custody due to extreme conditions and torture in the prisons. And finally, there's many more stats I could add, but nearly 1,000 new gates and roadblocks have been added on Palestinian roads by early 2025, and that number has gone up since then because while I was there this summer, a bunch more new gates and roadblocks went up all around Bethlehem, which completely hinders the freedom of movement, not just to get from point A to point B for work or for school or to visit a friend or a wedding or anything that you can imagine. All of life is just completely disrupted through the closure, and it's very arbitrary and continues to happen. Like you never know when a road is going to be closed or open. So these are just a few images to kind of help you see. The one on the left shows as of January 25, all of the new roadblocks that have been added since 2023. So this was just since January. Again, a lot more have been added since then. And this is in addition to the many roadblocks and gates that were already within on Palestinian roads. And I want you to notice that all of these are within the West Bank. They are not, none of these are to stop Palestinians from getting into the Israeli side of the separation wall. This is all within the West Bank, which is Palestinian territory, or supposed to be Palestinian territory for their state. And you can see it's almost impossible for them to even move. It is. They live in cages inside of cages inside of cages. And over on the right-hand side, these show the different types of settlements that have gone up since the light gray ones were ones that were there before October 7th, 23. The orange ones are outposts, which means they're illegal, established after generally illegal. Blue are outposts that turned into a settlement or merged into an existing one. And then the green ones are outposts approved for funding or infrastructure. So I hope this just gives you kind of a broad sense of Bethlehem, its beauty, its challenges, its people, and the reality that has been tightening around it like a noose around the neck more quickly, just very, very rapidly since October. And I'm not going to talk anymore now. I'm going to hand it over to Cole, and then we will continue our conversation from there. So thank you.
Kia ora, thanks, Mercy. Kia ora, everyone, or hello. Kia ora is our greeting here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. My name's Cole. I'm a photo video journalist and an Anglican from Ōtautahi Christchurch in the South Island here of New Zealand. And I'm also one of the kaitiaki members of Aotearoa Christians for Peace in Palestine. We are an ecumenical group. Similar to PIEN, we are working to create resources and opportunities to educate our faith community and to invite them into meaningful, prayerful, Christ-centered ways to respond, and to really confront some of the harmful theologies within our faith spaces that have often fueled the violence and injustice that Mercy was just covering within the West Bank and within Gaza and within the Israeli territories themselves. As a photo video journalist, I've been incredibly privileged to visit the land 3 times. Most recently was this year for a period of 6 months, where I was actually living in Bethlehem. I'll, on that cue, pop open my little PowerPoint and chuck it on full screen there. Hopefully that will come through to you guys. Can you see that fine?
Yes.
Cool. So this is just a brief rundown for anyone who's very unfamiliar. This is where Palestine is in the world. Palestine, Israel, this little sliver of land between Africa, Asia, and Europe. This is its reality today. You've got in white there in the middle the state of Israel. Off to the left there is the Gaza Strip, and off to the right is the West Bank. Gaza is where this genocide has been unfolding for the last 2 years now. The West Bank is where these systems that many have clarified as apartheid have been going on for many, many decades as well. This is it for any fellow New Zealanders. I don't have maps of it over Aussie and the US, unfortunately, but the total size of it is incredibly small. It's about the size of Canterbury for those in Aotearoa. But yes, I was living here in the West Bank in the beautiful little town of Bethlehem, just south of Jerusalem. And I was living in Ida refugee camp that Mercy mentioned earlier. So Ida is one of almost 60 refugee camps across the region. These are families and communities who were expelled from what is now Israel during its establishment. There were over 750,000 people ethnically cleansed from over 530 villages, which have been wiped off the map. 15,000 people were killed in a series of over 100 massacres. So that's some of the context that comes alongside the creation of the Israel-Palestine that we see today. So Ida Camp, as you can see, it doesn't look like a traditional refugee camp as we understand it. It very much began as a kind of tent city, how we might imagine, but almost 8 decades later, those tents, they then became tin shacks. Those tin shacks became concrete structures, and without the space to build outwards, as the families continued to grow, they've instead built up. So you end up with these very tall buildings, very narrow streets, and really limited infrastructure as a result of them not being able to develop like a normal city suburb would. This is the view from my little apartment in Ida Camp. You can see the village cemetery off to the right there, the community centre to the left, and the wall directly in front, which wraps around almost half of Ida refugee camp. And just the other side of the wall in this particular location is an Israeli military base. And so I want to draw your attention to that large blue gate that you can kind of see in the middle there. That gate has been built there to provide easy access directly from the military base into the refugee camp for these raids, which will take place once, sometimes twice a week or more. You'll have Israeli military coming in at nighttime, firing off live rounds, tear gas, rubber bullets, raiding people's homes and abducting them from their bedrooms. Even during the day, sometimes kids like this guy will be out on their bikes and get tear gas fired at them from the watchtowers, like this one you can see on the right-hand side there. In fact, a 2017 study actually found that Aiken camp is the most tear gas place in the world, a refugee camp. Just down the way a little bit is the camp football turf, where you can imagine with a big love of football there, lots of people love to hang out. But you can see what remains over the top of the turf there of netting that was put there. That wasn't to stop the ball from being kicked out. That was to stop tear gas from being fired in while people play throughout the day. And I've actually built a turf at the other end of the camp now that they refer to as the safe turf because they're less likely to be attacked. This is a photo I actually took when I was here last year of Mohammed Al-Azza, who runs one of the community centers in the camp, as he explained to us how he was shot in the eye during one of these raids with a rubber bullet while he was filming from the community center, and is incredibly lucky to be alive. I was sharing some of these stories here in Aotearoa last year and met this lovely guy, Saeed, and he goes, that's my brother. So a wonderful reminder as well that, wherever we are in the world, this is very close to home. We have loved ones in our community, people in our community whose loved ones continue to face this daily. So in some ways, this is a very sobering image. But in other ways, it's a very hopeful image. If I just stop sharing my screen there for a second, I can show you the workshop that he's standing in. They collect all of the tear gas canisters that get fired into this refugee camp, and they cut them up and they turn them into these beautiful little pieces of jewelry as this kind of swords to plowshares, taking these weapons created for destruction and turning them into this thing of beauty. So carrying onwards. Oh, let me just click back in there. This is the view out the back of my apartment over the rooftops of Ida. You can see the local health centre and school, which are both run by UNRWA. There's been a very targeted attack by Israel over several years, trying to discredit the work of UNRWA because they've been set up specifically to provide schooling, education, healthcare, and many other things to these communities who otherwise wouldn't have access to it. But I want to draw your attention to the water tanks on each of the rooftops here. This is on every Palestinian home in the West Bank, because even here in the West Bank, all of the water sources are controlled by Israel. And so 80% of the water is funneled off to Israeli civilians, leaving just 20% of it for locals. And that tap is turned on and off whenever Israel choose. And so residents here in the camp, for instance, we would go a week, 2 weeks having no water coming through the pipes. For one period while I was there this year, we had 2 months with no water coming through the pipes. So they'll store it on their rooftops, but once you're out, you're out. Mercy, it was quite surreal seeing your photo before, because this has been a photo I've shared a lot, and it's the same artwork, very faded years on. But this, the wall, as I mentioned before, this wraps around almost half of the camp. Palestinians call this the apartheid wall. Israelis call this the security barrier or the separation barrier. And so you would expect as a security feature for it to kind of run around the outside of the West Bank, but in reality, 85% of it is built inside the West Bank as a kind of de facto annexation, cutting off Palestinians from their farmland. As Mercy said before, this is from the other side of the wall, these olive groves in the foreground owned by farmers. So what was once a 5-minute journey has now become an hour, hour and a half, if you even have the correct permits to get through these checkpoints. And if you don't get through, if you don't farm your land, then after 3 years, under Israeli law, it becomes wasteland and the ownership transfers to the state. And so you see these patterns, again, similar to patterns here in Aotearoa, in Australia, and in the US, where there are laws that have been written into being to transfer the ownership from Indigenous communities to the state. So moving on a bit further, just outside of Bethlehem, I was incredibly privileged to reconnect with friends, the Nassar family, who I first met during my first time in the land 6 years ago. This is Dahir Nassar. They're a lovely Palestinian Christian family who own this hilltop farm that they call Tent of Nations. This is it. On a beautiful day, you can see right out to the Mediterranean coastline. They've got grapevines, olive trees. It's just this little haven on earth. But if you turn a little bit to the left, this is the view you get. Looking across to the hillside opposite, every hill around them has had these illegal Israeli settlements built on them. So these are townships built exclusively for Jewish Israelis. And often that land has been taken from Palestinian farmers through things like the wastelands law or violent expulsion of those communities. In fact, the Nassar family themselves on the land that we're currently standing on here, they've been in a 35-year legal battle to hang on to their land, proving again and again that it's theirs. They have all the ownership papers, but the court case keeps getting adjourned and adjourned and adjourned. And the settlements keep expanding and expanding. And so in June last year, to put some of those maps that Mercy just showed you into perspective, this caravan just across the back fence from them was placed there in June last year. This is an outpost. So all of these settlements are illegal under international law, but these outposts are illegal even under Israeli law. But the police and the military who control this area, they won't enforce it. So they'll let it remain there. And so in June this year, a year on, they had put down containers and begun to excavate to expand this outpost. And just 3 weeks ago, a friend sent me this update from the farm. There are now multiple housing units there, which of course comes with then an increase of settlers coming onto the land, vandalizing the Nassar farm, cutting up and uprooting their trees, threatening them with violence. And this also provides a legal pretext in those courts to say, oh, this Palestinian family just over the fence are a security threat. In quotation marks there. And so they could be forced off their land because of this. And so again, because that map that we saw of the West Bank earlier with these settlements and outposts becomes even more fragmented, and then on the right-hand side there with these settler-only roads and closed military zones around it, the West Bank becomes just a series of small enclaves of Palestinian existence, where self-autonomy is really just symbolic. Essentially, the whole area is under Israeli military control of various just aggressiveness. I mean, it's just completely unjust. So that map we saw earlier begins to look a little more like that. But the final place that I want to take you to is down south here in Masafir Yatta. Masafir Yatta is a collection of around 20 rural Palestinian farming villages scattered amongst the hillsides. And again, placed amongst them on the hilltops are Israeli settlements and outposts. And in June last year, as I was visiting there, I visited for the first time the village of al Khair when we heard that there were house demolitions taking place. So these take place across the West Bank, an average of, as Mercy said, since October 23, 4 a day. I think in the last year it's become 8 a day. So even now it continues to escalate. And so they say these structures, they've been built without the correct permits. But when Palestinians apply for permits, they never get them. It's a pretty much impossible system. And so the Israeli authorities will come in and demolish their homes. And so I'll never forget when we got the call, we arrived to Khair village to these scenes of families kicked out of their homes, being held back by rows of soldiers. And all that they can do is sit there and watch while the bulldozers roll in. And so it continued like this for several hours. In the end, 11 homes were demolished in 1 day, leaving 40 people without shelter in the heat of summer, 30 of them kids. And when people tried to kind of say, like, do you have no compassion? Why are you doing this? The soldiers, they all just respond, oh, we're just doing our job because this is how the system has been set up. There's no one there with direct accountability for this. And so the families are left to clear out the rubble of their homes, and to bring in your own heavy machinery requires permits. So unable to do that, they instead, over the coming weeks and months, have to chip their homes into even smaller pieces by hand and clear it away in a wheelbarrow. So this was 3 weeks on. Some of the houses had been cleared. Many of the other houses had not even been touched. There's just so much rubble to get through.
I have no words to describe what they do to us. It's really very hard. I mean, my kitchen is here. Some toys, some clothes. It is a work paper for my daughter. She were in the school. You know, before the holiday.
So the house we saw being demolished before belongs to Eid, and some of the families they got funding, they put up tents, but again these tents didn't have permits. So about a month later, just as they were getting back on their feet, the Israeli military returned.
Israeli bulldozers back and they knocked down, the homes which donated to the families.
And so these communities continue to face this relentless destruction, and it can happen at any stage. Military coming in to detain people, settlers coming to attack people, and so many of them will stay up all through the night on night watch, as you see here in this photo. Not that they can prevent anything, but at least they can film it when it happens, because if you don't film it, the police, the military will always take the side of the settlers. And I think the story of Khair really came to a T this year in July when my friend Alda, 31 years old, father of three, a human rights defender, an incredibly lovely man, just the kindest person, loved by everyone who's visited the village.
Goodbye one more time. Goodbye. 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 Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.
So Alda was the first person I met in Masafariata in Khair last year, and he explained to me their village's story, how they were displaced from southern Israel following the establishment of Israel. They moved to this land, they sold over half their flock of camels and sheep, they bought the land, and then the settlement right next door, the settlement in the background there with the lights, Carmel, was established in 1980 and has continued to expand all around them. And Alda was always sending me updates by WhatsApp, and I got this message on July 28th saying, they've bought in a digger, they're excavating in the middle of our village to build a settlement there. Please send help. And that was the last message I ever got, because as this day of work finished, the digger began to roll, crushing their sewage pipes, olive trees, fences, and the villagers came out to stop it, surrounding this digger to try and prevent any further destruction. And in response to this, Yinon Levy, a settler who's been sanctioned by many countries around the world, came over waving his pistol and fired off 2 shots in the direction of where people were standing. And it was the first of those shots that killed my friend Alda. But following his murder, when the military arrived, instead of arresting the killer caught on camera, they took orders from Yinon Levy on which of Alda's family members to arrest, and in the end, 22 of his cousins and brothers were taken off to Ophir prison and beaten, humiliated over many days. Meanwhile, his killer was released back to home detention in less than 24 hours, cleared of all charges within 5 days, and back terrorizing the village within a week, continuing the excavation work, cutting these water pipes to over 100 residents in the south half of the village. And all of this was happening just behind the community centre, where everyone was still waiting to bury Alda because Israel had actually stolen his body and were refusing to return it. And so 60 of the village's women went on hunger strike, including Alda's sister, his mother, and his wife, starving themselves just in order to bury their loved one. And 10 days later, finally, Israel released Alda's body, but then set up checkpoints to prevent people attending the funeral. So some of us, we snuck down the bottom of the valley out of eyesight. We got there, we held the funeral, but there's still no closure because there's been no justice. Alda's killer remains free. He continued the excavation work, and there in this photo you can see 4 settlement houses. There's now 8, which are splitting the village in half, cutting off water, electricity, and road access to over 100 residents. And just a few weeks ago, they got demolition orders for 12 more homes, the greenhouse, and the community centre. So it's relentless. It continues week after week after week all across the West Bank. This is the reality for Palestinians, and for those communities around Bethlehem as well. So I will jump out of my screen there, and I'll throw back to Mercy. We'll kind of jump into a bit of korero, some conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Akul. It just, while you were talking, it was just bringing back so much of the heaviness that everyone who goes over there feels it. I just want to say to anyone listening, if you have a question for Cole or myself, please type it in the chat because we want to interact with you. We are going to just have a conversation now for the next 20 minutes or so, talking more about some of the experiences that we had and just conversing, and we want to interact with you. Yeah, I mean, you're what you brought up about Musafariyata, which for those who don't know, that was actually the movie, the documentary No Other Land
Mm.
was filmed based on that. So if you've seen that, this is what's going on in that village now. If you haven't seen that documentary, please go check it out. But it reminded me, Cole, not this summer, but the one before, I went and visited a Bedouin village also that was in the process of being depopulated. I was with a group of people and we were held up by this flying Israeli checkpoint, and we finally got through. And as we drove into the area where this ethnic cleansing was going on, there were spray painted, like blue lines spray painted over like all the Arabic languages on the road, like the highway road, like telling what towns are ahead. They were all spray painted out, and there were blue stars of David spray painted on top, basically to show like we knocked this village out, we knocked that village out, we knocked this village out. And there were big Israeli flags that were draped over the evidence of villages that had previously been depopulated. And there was one Israeli flag I remember standing on top of this lonely barren hill. It almost looked like the American flag on the moon, just like, and we pulled into this little village. All the women and children had already left, and the men were there packing, dismantling their homes, driving off the animals, packing up all of their resources. And while we were there, young settlers on their ATVs and on their little three-wheelers and vehicles were driving around, revving their engines, flipping us off. Some of them came after our bus. Some of the people stayed on the bus because they didn't want to walk out there, and they actually chased them down the road, terrifying them, like driving right up against them so that they had to keep driving away. Finally, Israeli military came and told us to leave. I want to mention that there was an Israeli woman out there because when we're talking about all this, it's really easy to get a one-dimensional view of things like Israelis are bad, Palestinians are the ones suffering or whatever. But there are many Israeli activists who are doing incredible work. And when we came out to that village, there were two Israelis out there who were staying there as protective presence in this village. When the army came up and they told us we had to leave, she was out there yelling with them, saying, these settlers are committing the crime, forcing this village, and we're just people here trying to help, and you're telling us to leave. Why don't you tell them to stop? And this is really one of the underlying issues, is that the Israeli army does not do anything to stop these settlers. In fact, they protect them. And so, yeah, we watched the dying of the village as it was packed up and hauled away. It was something I will never, ever, ever forget.
It's such a structural thing, right? Like even just selecting which stories to share today, there's so
Oh,
many examples I can speak to of having seen Palestinians being attacked by the settlers.
yeah.
And when the police, the military turn up, it's always the Palestinian that gets suspected, gets detained, or even gets arrested. The police, the military, the settlers, they all work hand in hand. This is de facto policy across the West Bank, and so it continues. I mean, I think I heard somewhere this year alone, there's been around a dozen villages in the Jordan Valley itself that have been completely, displaced. And it's not just the villages as well. You know, the refugee camps up in Jenin and Tulkarm have been completely emptied by Israeli forces. Over 40,000 people displaced, and now they're systematically demolishing these refugee camps. Again, to
Right.
kind of hide the evidence that the systems that we're seeing in the West Bank today, the practices, the very structural nature of it, is the same structural nature and systems that Israel was formed on. As I say, these 530 villages that were ethnically cleansed and expelled from their land. You know, you can go and visit these today in Israel. Villages like Lifter in West Jerusalem, I visited last year with Yaqub Alder. He's 84 years old. He grew up in this village. This year I visited Ikrit village in the north, a Palestinian Christian village, who were told, oh, you have to leave this land for 2 weeks for military purposes back in 1948. And when they tried to return, no, we need it for 2 more weeks. And then the weeks went on and the months went on, and 2 years later, they still hadn't been able to return. And the Israeli High Court ruled that the military had to let these communities return, but instead they came in, the military, on Christmas Eve to this Christian village, and they bombed and bulldozed every single house, leaving only the church standing. And those residents of Ikrit, they remain in the land today. They have Israeli citizenship, but they are Palestinians. They live just 10 minutes, half an hour's drive away from their village, and still they're denied the right to return to their land. So yeah, it's important, I think, to understand the context of how we got to where we are today, and that it's not distant history either. It's very recent. The trauma of
And
that
nor is it
continues.
just recent history. It's just part of the ongoing story of the continued ethnic cleansing and removing Palestinians one village at a time from the land. But when you were talking about all of these ethnically cleansed Bedouin villages, it made me think of Taibe. And maybe we can talk a little bit about this, Cole. I see there's some questions coming in, so we'll want to answer those too. But Taibe is the last Christian village that was like 100% Christian. It was the only one that was left in the West Bank. And in the Bible, it was the village of Ephrathah. And it's where Jesus retreated after he raised Lazarus from the dead. And I asked one of my Palestinian Christian friends, why has everyone in this village like all stayed Christian? And he said, I think they were just so proud that Jesus came to their village and stayed here after he raised Lazarus from the dead that they just could not convert. So there's like this big statue in the middle of town of Jesus with the Bible verse talking about when Jesus came to their village. But a lot of the Bedouin villages on the outskirts of Taibe had already been ethnically cleansed. So just in the past month or two this summer, so that there were already all these new people who had moved into Taibe proper, a lot of Muslims, a lot of Bedouins. And then the settlers started coming into this Christian village. I mean, these people are not doing anything that you would even be able to use as the remotest excuse for we have to go in and not that that's a valid argument anyway, but there's not even a shred of anything that you could use for any type of excuse for the kind of violence that has been enacted upon Taiba, in which settlers have come in and set fire, like right inside the village itself, to the fields all around this ancient Byzantine church. They have been destroying the people's gardens, setting fire to cars, threatening the local people. So this is it's just one more small example just to give you guys the sense of the broadness, there's a picture of it. Thank you, Cole. The all pervasiveness of it and the rapidity that this is happening so fast now. Yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything else about Taibe, Cole. I'm trying to talk a little fast because I am noticing the time is getting short and we do
Yeah.
have some questions here.
No, I think exactly what you say. I'll just the if I just oh well yeah another quick Christian story that I think is really worth sharing, and I'll just get up her photo is the story of Layan Nasser. So Layan, who is about to appear on screen for people. Layan is a 25-year-old Palestinian Christian, an Anglican like myself, who was abducted from her home by Israeli military in April last year. And so I've never actually met Layan, but I met her mother Lulu, who explained that they were woken at 4 a.m. to a loud knocking on the front door. And she went and opened the door and found around 15 heavily armed soldiers pointing their guns in her face who said, shh, or we'll shoot. We're in a state of war. We can do whatever we like. And so they took Lulu and her husband Sammy through to the lounge at gunpoint, and then they went through to Layan's room in the photo here, and they zip tied her hands together, blindfolded her, and took her away without the chance to say goodbye, without explaining why she was being taken. And she was held for 8 months last year in this system called administrative detention, where you can be held indefinitely with no charge, no trial, in prison conditions where there's well-documented reports of physical, sexual, and psychological abuse, starvation as well, to the extent where Israel's own leading human rights organization, B'Tselem, have described these as torture camps. And there's currently 3,500 others, like Layan, being held with no charge or trial in these conditions. So it raises this really jarring juxtaposition when we hear our elected leaders and our faith institutions rightly calling for the release of Israeli hostages held in Gaza, but we haven't spoken up with anywhere near the same outrage for Palestinians held in exactly the same manner for decades. And again, I think Leon's story highlights that. Because often it takes a Christian story to break through to some Christian spaces. And again, I want to emphasize, it shouldn't take that. We should care even if there were no Christians in the land. But the fact that it's our very first Christian communities who are facing the same persecution and we're losing that, I think is really important. This is our whakapapa, we call it in New Zealand. Our lineage, our history began in the land, and many of these communities can trace their roots back to Acts chapter 2.
Exactly.
Mm,
Exactly. When that's one of the things about this little village, Taibe, is that it's ancient. It used to be a Jewish village. I mean, this was a village that by and large began to follow Jesus Christ, and stayed following Jesus Christ. This
mm,
is deeply indigenous, as many of these villages are.
yeah.
Um, Maybe we should start looking at a few of these questions,
Yeah.
Cole. Here's one that's from Andrew Telfer. Says, I was last in the West Bank in early 2023, and many Palestinians told me they could live side by side with Israelis, providing they had equality and freedom. Have you a sense of how Palestinians feel about their future now, and do they have any hope at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. How do you work forward from, like, how do you move on after a genocide? Or not even move on, right? The genocide hasn't even ended. Even the ceasefire has not ended the genocide. So for a lot of people, that's the first thing they emphasize. This isn't a matter of not seeing eye to eye. It's a matter of structural injustice. And until those structures, those systems are stopped, then there cannot be reconciliation. There cannot be kind of side by side peace. That's just submission to the system otherwise. But people still, I think, hold hope. I think everyone I met really clarified as well. Like our issue is not with Jewish communities. It's not with Judaism. Our issue is with Zionism, with the ideologies that are fueling these systems that are displacing us, imprisoning us, slaughtering us. Um, but yeah, when you look at the situation on the ground, it is hard to find hope because the situation on the ground is just getting worse. But there's hope, I think, in the fact that people are speaking up, people are realizing, people are learning. However many people, are here on this webinar. It's important. Hope is embodied in our actions. And it's what our, yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, that is a tough one. I feel like before before October 7th, there was a small but durable movement of people who were working for like a one state type of solution where there'd be equality, freedom for everybody under the same law, under different types of paradigms, like maybe two federations or two states under one federal umbrella, different approaches. Um, and I still feel like that is probably the best solution. Although at this point, I think that people are going to want more distance from themselves. I think that small group of Israelis and Palestinians who were advocating for this model, um, maybe there's less of them now, and there's less people that could be persuaded. So I think there will have to be something maybe more like two strong federations that are separate where people feel like they have their space from the other because they don't feel safe with the other. But there definitely has to be some type of legal structure over that land. And this is something that we can all advocate for, talk about, and push for, which is that ultimately everybody there, however you figure out how the lay of the land is going to look, everybody's got to have the same rights and the same protections under the same law, regardless of their religion or their ethnic background. And
Mm,
that's just got to be a non-negotiable. And that's something that we have to keep insisting on. We don't have to come up with the perfect plan. There's a lot of brilliant people over there who
mm,
can work on this and who can, believe it or not, I believe, scrape together the hope to do it, as
mm,
long as they know that the system will go forward as it was planned and won't be usurped.
mm.
So that's where there needs to be a lot of international accountability
Yeah.
to make sure that such a thing would go through.
Yeah, because they're the ones who are going to have to live with the repercussions of it, right? They're the ones who are going to have to live it out. So it has to come from them. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's, as you say, that's our role as the international community. Our role is to actually ensure that that happens, to put systems in place and accountability so that like groups like the Israeli government and the Israeli society actually have to come to the table with genuine intentions to end this, because there are Jewish communities within Israel and around the world who are standing up and saying, like, not in our name, this doesn't represent us. But all of those who are actually on the front lines of that peace building, those who are working with Palestinian communities to build those bridges, to confront these injustices, they all say the work we do is barely stemming the flow. Like, it requires the international community to stand up. Then our work can mean something. But until there are meaningful steps like sanctions, boycotts, divestment to actually isolate and hold Israel to account, these are some of the most effective pathways of non-violence that we have at our disposal. And if we don't support these pathways of non-violence that Palestinians have engaged in for decades, then we really can't be surprised. In fact, it's quite hypocritical of us to condemn violence when it inevitably happens, unless we're actually willing to put our money where our mouth is and support these pathways of non-violence. Yeah.
That's right. And I'll just also add one more thought. Do they have any hope at all? I will say that when they see and hear from others in the international community, Palestinian Christians, especially when they see their brothers and sisters in Christ coming alongside, standing, speaking, even taking a costly stand, that gives them hope. When we come and visit them and spend time with them, when we support them in all the different ways that they can be supported, that gives them hope. And so if their hope is waxing thin, we can help. And I think that kind of bleeds into the next question
Yeah.
here from Andrew North, which says, how do you look after yourself in the ongoing grief of it all? And I would say being able to do something to help provide hope for my brothers and sisters in Christ, and my Muslim and Jewish brothers and sisters in the land who are taking the costly stand and doing the work. That helps me so much process my grief.
I asked
And
our friend Dr. Lama Mansour from Nazareth this question in an interview one time, and she said, actually, I want you to give me hope,
yeah,
because in many ways you have more control over what happens in this land than I do. And so I
yeah,
think it's a challenge to all of us. We all create hope. If this is where things should be and this is where things are, then all of this empty space between we fill with hope with every little action. So I think when we feel despair, when we feel that grief, channel it into something meaningful, anything, and every little action kind of tops up that jar until one day we see a Palestine where Muslims, Christians, and Jews all live freely with equal rights side by side, where everyone in the land, as you say, has justice, has the image of God and their dignity upheld within them.
amen. You know, it also reminds me of something that my friend May Elise Cannon, she runs an organization called Churches for Middle East Peace here in the States, and she often says, despair is the luxury of the privileged. And so we we can't give in to the despair, even though we feel it. I mean, we all feel the despair at times. Let's be honest, we're humans. Um, but but yes, giving hope to our Palestinian friends and also even just engaging in like humanitarian work, whatever kind of gift that you have, channeling it, using your energy, maybe painting, maybe drawing, maybe writing, maybe praying, taking some time to pray, and even fast and intercession. I mean, there's getting politically engaged. There's so many different things that we can do. And I think as long as we can keep putting our energy into that, we are not going to just succumb to the type of despair that makes us sit down and give up or lose hope. We are people, as my friend Omar Harami, a Palestinian Christian, says, we are Easter people. Therefore, we are a people of hope.
Mm. And hope even when it doesn't look hopeful. I think
Yeah.
Sam and John Manai are amazing theologians. They've just written a book, and their kind of chapter in the book is focused on martyrdom. And they're like, we follow a martyr's God. We follow Jesus who went to the cross. Like, our solidarity can't just be comfortable, and it can't just be kind of verbal prayer, but it's prayer in action. It's what we do with our hands and our feet. If it's Jesus' path went to the cross, it was
Yeah.
costly. And I think we've embodied that throughout church history. We've seen some beautiful movements, standing up not just to injustice, but standing up to injustice that is often fueled by our own faith communities. And that is a big responsibility of ours. I think, what is happening in Palestine is an inherently Christian issue. Wherever we live, Australia, New Zealand, the US, we are either the countries sending the weaponry, the machinery, and the funding of these systems of injustice and slaughter, or we are allied with those countries We are still trading with Israel. Until there's a significant enough policy shift, we are deeply complicit. Some of the theologies within our own faith communities that justify this and cheer on what's happening in Gaza. It's the responsibility of all of us to educate and to push against that, on behalf of those on the ground who cannot do that as safely as we can. To give a little bit of our comfort for justice. I mean, that's the center of what Christ and the gospel is all about: justice and love and peace as a result of those things.
Which sort of brings us back to the whole Advent theme. I've often felt like if we really want to if God is really calling us to engage with Palestine and Israel, it will help us become real Christians. All of these things, the martyrdom, really taking that costly stand to be with the Lord where he is, to share his sufferings with him and to be with him. And so, yeah, I think that just opens up that space again for us to think about this as we go into Advent and as we're thinking about Bethlehem. And I think it even kind of ties in with the final question that we have here, which says, what ideas can you suggest to get community Christmas carol groups to draw participants to attend Bethlehem, Gaza, the whole of Palestine? Oh, to put their
Trying to
attention
get their
to it.
attention to.
Yeah. What response can you give to those who say this event should be non-political? I would say the gospel advocating for people who are living under oppression is inherently political and not political. I mean, it's actually just a moral or ethical issue. But yes, it does touch political, as a lot
That's
of
why
things
Jesus was
too.
killed.
Exactly. Exactly. So if people are saying, I don't want to get involved in politics, I think that's a big cop out because we're all involved in politics all the time, with whatever it is, whatever choices we're making on how we're living. But when it comes to standing up for the oppressed and speaking for the oppressed, especially our brothers and sisters in Christ, and I always use that as a starting point, to draw other Christians in. Like, at least if you can't get involved, it's too much for you to think about, at least think about your brothers and sisters in Christ and the unity of the body of Christ, and to hold that sacred place that Jesus prayed for in John 17 for the unity of the body, that we could do this, holding that unity of the body with our brothers and sisters who are suffering unseen and unknown by and large to the rest of the church. I think that's a beautiful gift that we could give not just to them, but to Jesus himself. And I would also just circle back to the Advent devotionals that I mentioned. There's one with Peace Catalyst that you could use. There's also one with FASNA, Friends of Sabile North America. They have a Preach Palestine. There are a lot of resources out there, which we would be happy, maybe we can email them after. But you might have more to add to that, Cole.
Yeah, well, I think just anything that kind of draws attention to it. Like, how can we weave what is happening in Palestine into the liturgies of our churches as particularly in this period of Advent, when we are talking about the land, we're talking about themes of hope, love, peace, and joy. It is a really jarring thing to be in this season and not be and be talking about what happened in the land and not be talking about what is happening in the land. And so, yeah, whether it's carol groups, whether it's prayer vigils, I think that's a really beautiful thing that we've found here with some of our work we've been doing, where churches, we're able to hold this space of lament. And that's been a really beautiful thing for some of the other groups who are working in that space who maybe don't do that. Like, there's partner with other groups. There's wonderful solidarity groups and people working for justice who are not specifically Christian, but they are building the kingdom of God, whether they realize it or not. And we are invited to participate in that. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to start from scratch, but we can support that. Maybe we support with food. Maybe we support with prayer. Maybe we support by creating the spaces, the vigils for lament. And that that encourages people. It gives people the space to let out the frustration, at the silencing, the injustice of it all, just the horror. And that tops up people's tank enough to continue going. And then, yeah, just having courageous conversations. I think one of the biggest, most harmful things within our faith community is this we've put unity on this pedestal. Churches are scared to have this conversation, to engage with this, because they say, oh, it's so divisive. And so we ultimately end up sacrificing Palestinians on the altar of church unity. And I'd say, like, what's the point of unity? What's the point of our churches if we are willing to stay silent in the face of a genocide that is being funded and committed by our faith communities and in the name of our God and our scriptures? We need to have the courage to stir up a little bit of holy disruption, some holy trouble, so that people actually learn these stories. And I think that's the key part. Focus on human stories. Leon's story, the story of the Nassad family, the story of Alda being killed in Khair. These things connect with people, and it's more invitational. It's not shaming people into stuff. That's never changed people, but it's saying, actually, hey, here's this other way. Maybe you've held these theologies, these ideologies. This is the reality on the ground, though. So here's another way that we can actually step into meaningful, prayerful, Christ-centered action for the good of everyone in that land.
Yeah, amen.
And Christmas is a beautiful time to do that.
That's right.
Mm.
And just to go back to Andrew North's question, I was just thinking, look after yourself in the ongoing grief of it all. Take care of yourself spiritually. Really engage with the Lord. Only the Lord can give us the hope and the strength that we need, keeping our heart in the right place to keep going in this, keeping our heart soft and full of love and all of the fruits of the Spirit. We have to continue to draw closer to the Lord. And that's really, I think, the only way that I've ultimately been able to look after myself is by maintaining my relationship with the Lord. Oh, gosh, it looks like another question just came in. I know we're getting ready to close up, but maybe we could look at this very quickly. Mercy and Cole, what do you think about this thought? Our relationship with God through Jesus is measured by our relationship with Palestine.
Yeah, I think it's exactly right. Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac says Gaza is the moral compass of our world, and I think it's the moral compass of our church, especially if we can hold to a theology that allows us to be silent in the face of genocide and apartheid and all of the horrors that we're seeing in the land. Then what is the gospel? It dilutes the gospel to a story of racism and destruction and domination, not a gospel of hope. So I think, yeah, our relationship with God, Jesus said, whatever you did to the least of these, you did to me. So whatever we allow to Palestinians, we are allowing to God. If we stay silent in the face of that, then we are just crucifying God again today. God in the faces of everyone in Gaza, everyone in the West Bank, everyone within the Israeli territories. Yeah, I think that's a very true statement.
Yeah. I agree. I was just thinking of how I remember Munther Isaac said I just heard him speak recently. I can't remember where it even was, but he was like, I wish people would at least take the parable of the sheep and goats literally. Like, now I'm going to be a literalist. Like, take this parable literally. Like, what you do to the least of these, you do to me. And that if we would really begin to live by that, I mean, this is something that Jesus did. And it's not just Palestinians, it's people anywhere that are living under systems of oppression and who are marginalized, all the things that he spoke about. But truly, this is the measure. According to Jesus, what we do to them, we do to him. And what if we need to take that more literally? Literally, with a little bit more fear of God in our hearts. I think that would be a good thing.
Well, as we draw to a close, thank you, Mercy and Cole, and what a privilege to be in this space with you. Did you set out to put us through the emotional ringer? Bad joke, yes. So all the points will filter down and that you have made in such a wonderful way, and we take them with us in our hearts and minds and emotions. Just one little postscript to when you were both talking about how to bring more of the Bethlehem, Gaza, West Bank wider context into our Christmas celebrations and wording. So in the last PIEN wrap, if many of you on the webinar today, there was a link to Preach Palestine, and it gave that site gives examples of how you can bring in, into the intercessions and others. So, as well as what has been said in our political action and our path of community action, there are other things that we want to do in our churches. And what a chilling line you gave, Cole. The injustice is fueled by our faith communities. But we're all in the faith community today. We don't give up the territory to those people who think in other ways than we do. And we take the Sabeel, the Ecumenical Liberation Theology, Palestinian Liberation Theology Center in Jerusalem, and Mercy has mentioned Omar Harami, known and loved by many of us. And each week the Sabeel Centre puts out a wave of prayer, to friends of Sabeel around the world. And I'm going to finish with an excerpt of their wave of prayer this week. The format of the document that we get each week gives a piece of information first before we then pray. And the one I had chosen, Cole has actually mentioned and even given us, the photos, the sequence of photos at the Nasser Tent of Nations location with the caravan, then the structure. And so, but I will read out as Sabeel has said. Last week, the establishment of a new settlement adjacent to homes in the Palestinian town of Bet Sahur, near Bethlehem, was announced. Overnight, tractors levelled the ground, and by morning, several caravans had been placed on the site. And as I said, we know what's coming. So we pray. Redeemer Christ, we cry out to you in anguish. Like the psalmist, we feel utterly isolated and forgotten, with settler colonial violence crushing us at all angles. Good God, hear our cry and deliver us from oppression. We pray that the international community may be awakened and take action. Good afternoon, everyone, and go in peace.
Thank you, Helen.
Thanks, Helen. And thanks all.
Yes, thanks everybody. Thanks for coming.